So before we start, I am going to apologize in advance if my French pronunciations are off. I have tried to get the correct pronunciations, but I hope you will excuse the wrong ones. So we're going to be talking about the French in India. France was one of the last European powers to come to India. They were here to gain a share of the rich trade riches that India was very famous for. And while they were here, they were enmeshed in intrigue and local politics, as well as being bound by geopolitical gambits that were being played out in Europe. In order to understand what the European powers were doing in India, we need to look at Europe in the 14th century. The Age of Discovery, also called the Age of Exploration, was a period from sometime in the late 15th century to the 17th century. It was a time when seafarers from a number of European states began to explore the world. They sailed beyond the usual sea routes and began to voyage to distant parts of the globe, many of which had seemed as mere myth in their literature. European exploration was aided by the new technological advances, like larger and stronger ships, and the invention of instruments like the compass and the astrolabe. Ships no longer needed to stay close to coastlines. They could now sail across the oceans. And what you're seeing here is a replica of a Spanish carrack. And this is the Spanish carrack Santa Maria, which was one of the ships that sailed across the Atlantic with Christopher Columbus. It began with the maritime expeditions of Portugal, aided and patronized by rulers like Prince Henry, Duke of Viso, son of the King John I. Also called Henry the Navigator, he set up schools for navigators, was responsible for the development of faster and lighter ships that could sail much further, as well as for the production of better maps. Spain followed suit, and in 1492, Christopher Columbus had set sail for the east by sailing west. A few years later, in 1498, Vasco da Gama, sailing under the flag of Portugal, was successful in finding a route to India. Another Spanish-sponsored voyage, this time under Ferdinand Magellan, achieved the first circumnavigation of the globe between 1519 and 1522. The opening of the route to the Indies and the discovery of the Americas by the Portuguese and the Spanish led to other European powers like the English, the Dutch, the French, also sponsoring exploration. A byproduct of European exploration was the creation of colonial empires. Seafarers from Europe not only explored the globe, but also conquered and colonized far-flung regions. Colonization reshaped power dynamics in Europe. The resultant geopolitical shifts led to the creation of new centers of power, sometimes even beyond Europe. The Age of Discovery transformed the world. Previously isolated parts of the world were now connected to form what would later be called the world system, and laid the foundation for globalization. Overseas exploration and the opening of the new maritime routes led to the growth of international trade and the expansion of trade networks. These became the origin of the global economy that we enjoy even today. One of the new centers of power that would reshape political dynamics in Europe was the Indian subcontinent. India was known for its wealth and prosperity. Spices and textiles from India had been prized in the markets of the known world for centuries. These were the catalyst for Portugal sending out voyages to find a direct route to India. This is an ancient Portuguese map showing all the ports in India. Once Vasco da Gama had done so, the other European powers would soon follow suit. The Dutch, the French, the English, the Danes would all establish trading posts here by the early 17th century. The French East India Company is a term we loosely use for all the French trading companies that were set up in the 17th and 18th centuries to oversee French commerce with India and Eastern Africa, along with other territories in the Indian Ocean, as well as in the East Indies. There were many failed French attempts in the 17th century to settle and trade in the East Indies. Most of these were undertaken by private companies. Inspired by the Dutch merchants who traded in Asia, small companies were set up and ships were sent out to the east. However, the Dutch were not going to hand over a share of their trade easily. One of these was the Dieppe Company. It was established on the 1st of June, 1604 by Henry IV of France. Looking for trade opportunities in the Far East, Henry issued letter patents to merchants in Dieppe, giving them exclusive rights to the Asian trade for a period of 15 years. However, in the end, the company never launched any expeditions under his name. After Henry died in 1610, the charter was renewed for a further 12 years. But the company remained inactive, and internal troubles in France led to other cities vying for trading rights. Finally, in 1616, 2 expeditions were sent to Asia from Normandy. 3 ships sailed for India and 2 for Bantam in Indonesia. Also in 1616, 2 ships sailed from Saint-Malo in Brittany to Java. One of these was captured by the Dutch, but the other came to the Coromandel coast, where they obtained permission from the ruler of Pondicherry to build a fort and a factory there, and returned with a rich cargo. Undeterred by these failures, a new venture began in 1626, sponsored by Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu was the first minister of France under Louis XIII and a very politically connected man. Using a mutual defense alliance between France and the Dutch Republic in Europe, he tried to set up an ambitious corporation that encompassed ships, crews, and capital from all across France. But even his patronage and the removal of the Dutch threat did not entice enough merchants to commit to the enterprise, and the company floundered. This company is very often seen as the first French East India Company. A large and state-backed trading company was set up in 1664 by Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the finance minister of Louis XIV. The Compagnie des Indes Orientales was a response to the growing influence of the English and the Dutch in Asia. Colbert hoped to open up new channels for foreign trade. He wanted to ensure that this would be a state-run organization, unlike the English and the Dutch companies, which were run by private merchants. He hired a man named François Charpentier, an archaeologist and a man of letters from the French Academy, to write up an account of the project in order to entice investors. The idea was to show the magnanimity of the king, who was granting his subjects access to the wealth of the East Indies while bringing glory to the state through the expansion of trade. This is in fact what was written by Charpentier in that pamphlet. The king, who is committed to nothing so much as making his reign productive and happy, having recognized the importance of navigation and long-distance voyages, and that these are not just a guaranteed mark of the power of the state, but even more an infallible means of creating abundance, believes that it is to his glory and paternal benevolence toward his people to have them undertake the East Indies trade. Colbert sent these out to possible investors, hoping to raise 15 million livres, of which the crown promised to cover 1/5. However, Colbert succeeded in raising only 7.4 million, most of which came from the king and his family and officials of the court. Outside of these, most were not interested in East Indian trade. They looked upon it as an obligation imposed by the crown. Subscriptions were purchased rather reluctantly, and shareholders often did not cover their full investment obligations. The problem lay in the fact that the merchants realized that they could do little to shape corporate policy. All decision-making power rested with Colbert and the king. Because of this, the company lacked in both mercantile experience and guidance. The Compagnie des Indes Orientales was granted a 50-year monopoly on French trade in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, a region stretching from the Cape of Good Hope to the Straits of Magellan. On arriving in India, the company secured a farman from the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in September 1666. This granted them the right to trade in Surat, but the Dutch and the English had been entrenched in Surat much longer, and the French struggled in the face of this competition. They began to look around for a new location to set up their factory. By 1683, the French had begun to look more favorably at a site on the Coromandel coast, Pondicherry. However, Colbert died that year, and this dealt a severe blow to France's already flagging fortunes in the Indian Ocean. Added to that were the high losses in shipping and infrastructure due to Louis's constant wars, as well as the Dutch seizure of Pondicherry. The company soon became insolvent and had to rent out its monopoly to a group of merchants. In 1719, the Compagnie des Indes Orientales was absorbed by a short-lived Compagnie des Indes. Louis XIV had died in 1715, and the resulting regency government under the Duc de d'Orléans, had led to messy politics of succession. The French economy was in shambles due to constant wars like participation in the War of the Spanish Succession. The Compagnie des Indes was the work of a Scottish financier, John Law, who approached the crown with a scheme to help the French out of their financial distress by restructuring the economy through the creation of a national bank and a trading corporation. This company held the monopoly for all French overseas trade and the right to issue banknotes. The company established successful ports on the islands of Réunion and Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, later called Bourbon and Ile-de-France. New shares were sold for enormous sums. Unfortunately, the prices of the Indes shares were pushed up by speculation and collapsed, rather disastrously for the shareholders in 1720. In 1723, King Louis XV granted the company fresh privileges. The company flourished from 1726 to 1746. It established factories in many parts of India, exporting cotton and silk cloth. After 1746, the spendthrift policies of the French government and the expenses of the 7 Years' War in Europe brought severe losses to the company in terms of territory and ships. By 1769, the company's monopoly of trading rights had been suspended, and in February 1770, the company had to transfer all its properties, rights, and assets, valued at a total of 30 million livres, to the state. In return, the king would pay off all the company's debts and annuities. The company was officially dissolved in 1770. A new Compagnie des Indes was formed by Louis XVI in 1785 with a capital of 40 million livres. It had a 7-year monopoly of trade with all ports east of the Cape of Good Hope, excluding Mauritius and Réunion. This company owned 11 ships and made regular voyages to ports in India and China. It might well have continued to do so and continued to do well, except for the French Revolution. In 1790, the new National Assembly took away its privileges by abolishing the monopoly and throwing open the Far Eastern trade to all Frenchmen. The company fell into decline and was finally dissolved in 1794. So what happened to the French in India? After obtaining the firman from the Emperor Aurangzeb, Colbert's Compagnie des Indes Orientales sent out another expedition under François Caron, who reached Surat in 1668 and established the first French factory in India. The French call their factories loges. They generally consisted of a home and some land around it, where the French had the right to fly their flag and establish trading posts. This over here is a map of Surat, and this part over here was called Le Jardin de Français, the French garden where you had the French lodge. The decline of the Mughal Empire after the death of Aurangzeb in 1707 led to the European companies intervening in Indian political affairs for their own gains. It gave them an opportunity to expand their political influence and control over the affairs of the South Indian states. The English East India Company had, by the end of the 17th century, eliminated the Portuguese and Dutch rivals. However, France had now appeared as a new rival. For nearly 20 years, from 1744 to 1763, the French and the English would wage a bitter war for control over trade, as well as for wealth and territory in India. Between 1728 and 1740, bolstered by the infusion of money from the crown, the value of the trade of the Compagnie des Indes increased by 10 times. In 1740, it stood at 880,000 pounds sterling, but was still half of that of the English company. Before 1725, the French position in India had been negligible. By 1740, it was strong enough to alarm the English. The actual clash between the two companies in India was a result of a war that broke out between the two states in Europe, part of the War of Austrian Succession. It spilled over into India as well, where the two companies clashed with each other. Even when the war ended in 1748, rivalry in trade and over possessions in India continued. The man responsible for much of this was Joseph Francois Dupleix, the Governor General of Pondicherry. Soon after arriving in 1741, Dupleix began to pursue the idea of a French territorial empire in India. This ambition, however, was at odds with the disinterest of his distant superiors and the French government, which aimed to avoid provoking the British. Dupleix evolved the strategy of using the well-disciplined modern French army to intervene in the quarrels of the Indian princes. He would support one against the other and then secure monetary and commercial or territorial favors from the victor. Dupleix's goals conflicted with British interests in India, leading to a series of military clashes and political maneuvers, which continued even during the times when France and Britain were officially at peace. He was determined to secure for France a powerful Indian ally who would then help the French oust the English. In 1748, a situation arose in the Carnatic and in Hyderabad, which enabled Dupleix to try and gain ground for the French. The Carnatic is this area here marked Arcot. It's also called the Carnatic. In the Carnatic, Chanda Sahib, the son-in-law of the previous Nawab of Arcot, Dost Ali Khan, began to conspire to take the throne from the ruling Nawab, Anwaruddin. In Hyderabad, the death of the Nizam-ul-Mulk Asaf Jah led to a civil war between his son, Nasir Jung, and his grandson, Muzaffar Jung, the grandson of Asaf Jah by his daughter, so Nasir Jung's nephew. Dupleix seized this opportunity and concluded a secret treaty with Chanda Sahib and Muzaffar Jung, offering the help of his well-trained French army. In 1749, the three allies defeated and killed Anwaruddin in battle. Anwaruddin's son, Muhammad Ali, fled to Trichinopali. The rest of the Carnatic went to Chanda Sahib, who rewarded the French by giving them 80 villages around Pondicherry. In Hyderabad, the French helped Muzaffar Jung. Nasir Jung was killed and Muzaffar Jung became the Nawab. He rewarded the French by giving them additional territory around Pondicherry as well as the town of Masulipatanam. He gave 500,000 or 5 lakh rupees to the company and another 5 lakh to the French troops. Dupleix was given 20 lakh rupees and a jagir worth 1 lakh rupees a year. He was made honorary governor of the Mughal dominions on the east coast from the river Krishna to Kanyakumari. Dupleix stationed his best officer, the Marquis de Bussy, at Hyderabad along with a French force. Muzaffar Jung was unfortunately killed in 1751. Debussy quickly raised Salabat Jung, the third son of Asaf Jah, to the throne. In return, Salabat Jung gave the French the northern Sarkars in Andhra. Dupleix's plan had succeeded for the time being. The French had made important states into client states. However, the English had not stayed silent spectators. In order to increase their own influence and to offset French influence, they had been intriguing with Nasir Jung and Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, who was holed up in Trichinopali, was under siege from the French and Chanda Sahib. The English East India Company decided to help him. The young Robert Clive, a clerk in the East India Company, proposed that this pressure might be removed by an attack on Arcot, the capital of the Carnatic. The idea was accepted, and Robert Clive attacked Arcot with a force of 200 English and 300 Indian troops. Chanda Sahib and the French were forced to raise the siege of Trichinopali. The French forces were defeated, Chanda Sahib was captured and killed. Finally, the French government in France, tired of the heavy losses and expenses of war in India, initiated peace negotiations and agreed in 1754 to the English demand for the recall of Dupleix from India. Despite a treaty between the British and the French not to interfere in regional Indian affairs, both continued their colonial intrigues. The outbreak of the 7 Years' War in Europe in 1756 reignited hostilities between the English and French forces in India. The French were struggling with significant financial difficulties. They tried to increase their influence at the court of the Nawab of Bengal in order to expand their trading activities in the region. In 1756, they urged Nawab Siraj-ud-Daulah to attack and seize the English Fort William in Calcutta. This led to the Battle of Plassey in 1757, where the British decisively defeated the Nawab and his French allies, extending the East India Company's control over the entire province of Bengal. The English forces captured the French settlement of Chandarnagar in 1757. However, the final decisive battle was fought in the south at Wandiwash, it's actually called Vandavasi. This took place on the 22nd of January in 1760, when the English general Ayacout decisively defeated the French, led by the Comte de Lally. Following Wandiwash, Pondicherry fell to the British in 1761. Within a year, the French had lost all their possessions in India. The war ended in 1763 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which also ended the 7 Years' War. Pondicherry and Chandarnagar in India were restored to France. However, they could not be fortified. The French were now in India only to trade, and that too under British protection. Thus ended French ambitions of an empire in India, and the British became the single dominant European power on the subcontinent. So we'll move on to the French lodges in India. The first one, and this of course is the French territory between 1741 and 54, Chandarnagar in Bengal, Yanaon in Andhra, Pondicherry, Karikal, and Mahe. Masulipattnam is not one of the French establishments, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it because it was by far and away the largest French lodge here in India. From 1686 to 1759, the city was held by the French and the Dutch until it was finally ceded to the British, who captured the city and the fort from the French in 1759. It was the largest and most significant lodge among all others and was located on the outskirts of Masulipattnam. The major export items from here were diamonds, spices, turmeric, muslin fabric, kalamkari fabrics, and potassium nitrate. Parasupeta is named after French traders who came to Masulipattnam from Paris in 1756. The people who came from France were called Parasulu or Parasulu, and their settlement was called Parasupeta or the French Peta. The French Peta included 2 bungalows, a chapel, and some other buildings. The main establishment of the French was Pondicherry. Pondicherry, as a trade center on the Coromandel coast, attracted all the European states. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the Danes, the British, and the French all vied for it. In January 1674, the French East India Company set up a trading center at Pondicherry, and this outpost eventually became the main French settlement in India. François Martin, leading a party of refugees expelled by the Dutch from Saint-Thomé near Madras and from Masulipattnam, landed at Pondicherry, where he established a trading station with the consent of local authorities. A small town with some fortifications gradually grew around Pondicherry. François Martin made remarkable improvements to the town and its commercial ties, despite strong opposition from the Dutch and the French. He entered into extended negotiations with the sultans of Golconda, facilitated by several French merchants and doctors who were in the favor of the sultan. Trading in jewelry and precious stones, which had become highly fashionable in European courts, was one of their many activities. The French developed the town in a grid pattern, with the French quarter and an Indian quarter separated by a canal. So this is the French quarter, the Indian quarter was on this side, and this was the beautiful star fort of Pondicherry. On 21st August 1693, during the 9 Years' War, Pondicherry was captured by the Dutch. The governor of Dutch Coromandel, Lawrence Pitt the Younger, sailed with a fleet of 17 ships and 1,600 men from Nagapattinam and bombarded Pondicherry for 2 weeks, after which François Martin surrendered it. At the Peace of Rizek, all parties agreed to return conquered territories, and in 1699, Pondicherry was handed back to the French. In 1742, Dupleix became the governor of Pondicherry and the French possessions in India. He successfully defended it against an English fleet in 1748. However, as has been discussed earlier, Dupleix was recalled to France. On 17 January 1761, the British captured Pondicherry from the French and the town was destroyed. So this is a drawing sent to the governor of the fort in Madras, showing them how the fort has been destroyed. It was returned under the 1763 Treaty of Paris at the conclusion of the 7 Years' War. The British took control of the area again in 1793 at the Siege of Pondicherry amid the wars of the French Revolution, and it was returned to France again in 1814. Chandarnagar, now called Chandannagar, was a town that historians believe the French created. It was created by amalgamating various smaller localities in the area. The first Frenchman here is considered to be a Duplessis, who bought land at Boro Kishanganj, now located at North Chandarnagar, for 401 takas in the year 1673. The first director of the French East India Company paid 40,000 coins to the Mughal Subedar in 1688 to gain control of the area and to build a factory there. The prosperity of Chandarnagar as a French colony started soon after. At this time, the company establishment consisted of one director, 5 members who formed a council. They had 15 merchants and shopkeepers, 2 notaries, 2 priests, 2 doctors, and a carpenter. The French army consisted of 130 foot soldiers, 20 of whom were native Indians. The Fort d'Orléans that you can see in the picture was constructed in the year 1696. In 1730, Duplessis was appointed governor of the town. During the course of the next 10 years, he is said to have built 2,000 brick houses and developed trade. The population of the city reached to be around 1 lakh of people at this time, and the fledgling town of Calcutta was considered to be a poor cousin of Chandarnagar. From Duplessis' time to 1756, Chandarnagar was the main center for European commerce in Bengal. The town traded in opium, silk, indigo, rice, rope, sugar, and textiles. Robert Clive has described it as a large, rich, and thriving colony. The outbreak of the 7 Years' War in Europe led to Chandarnagar being bombarded and captured in March 1757 by Robert Clive, aided by Admiral Charles Watson of the Royal Navy. The town's fortifications and many houses were demolished in 1759, and Chandarnagar's importance as a commercial center would now be eclipsed by that of Calcutta, situated downriver. Chandarnagar was restored to the French in 1763, but taken again by the British in 1794 during the Napoleonic Wars. The town was returned to France in 1816, along with a 3 square mile enclave of surrounding territory. By 1900, the town's former commercial importance had gone, and it was little more than a quiet suburb of Calcutta. Like the 3 other French-administered colonies of India, Chandarnagar was under the jurisdiction of French-controlled Pondicherry. There was only one governor for the entire French India. He resided in the principal city of Pondicherry, and from time to time he would visit the other colonies. There was one administrator under the governor in each colony. Chandarnagar still has a few remnants of French colonial architecture, for example, this building and this ghat. After Indian independence in June 1948, the French government held a plebiscite which found that 97% of Chandarnagar's residents wished to become a part of India. In May 1950, the French allowed the Indian government to assume de facto control over Chandarnagar, officially ceding the city to India on the 2nd of February 1951. De jure transfer took place on 9th January 1952. It was incorporated into the state of West Bengal in October 1954. The inhabitants were given the right to retain French nationality, like their counterparts in Pondicherry. Yanam or Yanam in Andhra, the French established a trading post here in 1723, making it the 3rd French colony established in India, but again gave up the area in 1727 after commercial operations proved unsuccessful. Governor-General Duplessis seized it again in 1731, but it was only confirmed by the Nizam of Hyderabad in 1751. Until the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Yanam went under British control intermittently, but was finally restored to France in 1814. Today surrounded entirely by the state of Andhra Pradesh, Yanam is still sometimes known as French Yanam. Karaikal was promised to the French in 1738 by the exiled Raja Sayaji of Tanjavur in exchange for their assistance. However, the transfer of control only occurred in 1739 with the help of Chanda Sahib of Arcot, when the French formally obtained the town. In 1749, additional territories consisting of 81 villages were ceded to the French during their siege of Tanjavur, a grant that was confirmed by treaty in 1754. Karaikal changed hands multiple times in the following years due to the conflicts between the French and the British, notably during the siege of 1760, when British forces captured the town after a 10-day defense. Karaikal was eventually restored to French control in 1817, following the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Mahe is situated at the mouth of the Mahe River and is surrounded today by the state of Kerala. The French East India Company constructed a fort on the site of Mahe in 1724 after a treaty was concluded between Andre Molandin and Raja Vazunavar of Vatakara 3 years later. In 1741, Bertrand Francois Mahe, a naval officer, retook the town after a short period of occupation by the Marathas. There is a little bit of a controversy whether Mahe is named after Bertrand Francois or Bertrand Francois took the name Mahe because of his bravery there. In 1761, the British captured Mahe and the settlement was handed over to the Raja of Kadatanadu. The British restored Mahe to the French as part of the 1763 Treaty of Paris. It was lost again to the British in 1779, restored to the French in 1783, and finally handed over to the French in 1785. At the outbreak of the French Revolutionary Wars in 1793, a British force under James Hartley captured Mahe. In 1816, the British restored Mahe to the French as part of the 1814 Treaty of Paris after the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars. Mahe remained under French jurisdiction as a small French colony from 1816. After Indian independence, the area continued to be French-ruled until 1954, when a long anti-colonial struggle culminated in it joining the Indian Union. The incorporation of the French establishments into Indian territory. A treaty of cession was signed by India and France in May 1956. It was ratified by the French Parliament in May 1962. On 16 August 1962, India and France exchanged the instruments of ratification, under which France ceded to India full sovereignty over the territories it held. Every year, 16th August is celebrated as the de jure transfer day in Pondicherry. Pondicherry and the settlements of Karaikal, Mahe, and Yanao became a union territory with effect from 7th of Jan 1963 by the 14th Amendment to the Indian Constitution. This is the Treaty of Cession being signed in 1956 and Jawaharlal Nehru taking a guard of honor in Pondicherry. After liberation, the French government offered citizenship to the people living in these colonies of French India. French law made it easy for thousands of colons, as they are called, ethnic or national French from former territories of North and East Africa, India, and Indochina to live in mainland France. Today, Pondicherry still has a community of French people living in the city, and French is also an official language. There are 6,500 French people registered in South India, and of those, about 5,500 live in Pondicherry. A small flavor of French colonial life can still be found in Pondicherry. These are some views of Pondicherry from the late 1800s. This is the church, this is the old pier, and today, of course, the French Quarter is filled with pretty villas with large compounds, ornate ironwork balconies, big walls with majestic gateways. A lot of them have been converted into guest houses and restaurants. The streets here still have their French names, and French bakeries abound. This is the monument to Dupleix that still stands in Pondicherry, and this is one little vestige of the French left here in India. This is the only star fort left in India. It's not a French fort. It's a French-built fort. It was built by Tipu Sultan. This is the Manjarabad fort in Karnataka. And it was built by Tipu Sultan, and he called in French engineers to build it for him. This is one of the last remaining Vauban-style forts in India. The others were all completely destroyed. So this is the last vestige now of the French in India. Thank you.
So I have a question, a couple of questions. How did the French approach to trade diplomacy in India differ from that of the British or the Dutch?
It really didn't. They were all the same. It was all about making money at the end of the day. Whether it was a state-run corporation like the French had,
Yeah.
or it was a trading corporation like the British or the Dutch, um, the bottom line is they were here to make money. Nothing more, nothing less. They got involved in local politics, again, to get money, territory, and monopolies on trade. If you ruled the area, you had the monopoly on trade. Nobody else could take it.
Question from PK. You refer to French establishments in India as colonies. So were these strictly colonies, or are the French territories under French law and system of governance?
So they were under French law. So I don't, sorry, colonies, French law, it works the same way, right? They were under French law quite definitely until 1954 ran under French law. But they were colonies. We call them establishments. You find this um, juxtaposition sometimes. They use the term French establishments in India, French colonies in India. But these four, the four of them, Pondicherry, Karaikal, Mahe, and Yanao, were definitely directly under the French. They had a French governor, they had French administrators sent by the French state from France.
Eva actually has a question that was I was begging to ask, dying to ask you. So, how did the French manage to partner up with Tipu Sultan against the British? Why did
See,
Tipu prefer the French rather than the British?
uh, my enemy's enemy is my friend. The
Yeah.
British were going after Tipu Sultan. They'd already done it with Hyder Ali. Then Tipu Sultan believed that the French would help him. He, in fact, wrote to Napoleon, sent letters to Napoleon via Mauritius. Unfortunately, they fell into British hands and caused, much angst. And then the British were quite determined to destroy Tipu Sultan after that. But he believed that the French helped, very much like what had happened with Chanda Sahib and Nasir Jan, that the French would help him get rid of the British. The
So
British
actually,
were
that was yeah. So that was my follow-on question, which was how much of it was the chicken and egg, right? So did the British go after Tipu because of his alliance with the French, or did he go to the
both.
French
They
because of that?
didn't, his alliance never happened. The alliance never happened. The letters never reached Napoleon. I don't even know if Napoleon was going to really do very much with them. Um, the alliance never actually happened. The French didn't actually help Tipu, but the British wanted to get rid of Tipu. That was quite definite. And they were going to do it in any way possible. This was just an
Uh,
excuse.
Well, lots of appreciation coming in. Thank you for engrossing
Thank you.
presentation, says Jyoti. Sabira says, I came in late, but what a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Question from Adil Desai. What were the implications of the French support to Tipu Sultan against the British one on the French trading company? I think we talked about this. But do you have a different answer on this one? What were the implications of the French support to Tipu Sultan against the British on the French trading company?
The French didn't help Tipu Sultan. The Majrabad fort,
Gotcha.
he employed engineers to design it. That was it. There was no real support. The French didn't actually manage. Tipu Sultan didn't get the support he thought he would get.
Right.
This thing. The Summer Palace, okay, he was.
Yeah. So I had another question, which is how does the French colonial experience in India compare to their approach in other colonies? I mean, for Africa, Caribbean, how is it different?
Um, I some of it is different in the sense that they just blundered out here. And I think they blundered pretty much everywhere they went. They lost North America. They lost a lot of their territories in Africa, but they've managed to hang on to it by their fingernails. They held on to South Asia, some parts of it, and they messed up everywhere where they went. I think it is primarily because of the problems in mainland France. The government in France invariably blunders, sends people who don't manage work properly, doesn't have enough funds, runs out of money frequently. So, in that sense, it was pretty much par for the course. The only thing is that here they were pretty much like they were everywhere else, up against the British. And by 1814, the British are going to ensure that the French are out everywhere. The 7 Years' War, at the end of the 7 Years' War and the Treaty of Paris, they were out of USA as well. I mean, the United States, North America as well. So I think pretty much par for the course. It worked quite the same everywhere.
So Jyoti asks a clarification. So other than Pondicherry and West Bengal, are there no other French quarters anywhere else in India?
There are. So Mahe is not in West Bengal or
That's right.
Pondicherry. Karaikal, Yanaon is not. So
Okay.
the whole Union Territory is one of those Union Territories spread all across India, actually. Chandranagar is the only one that went back to the British. I mean, to Bengal, came to the state of Bengal, is incorporated into the state of West Bengal. The other four are a Union Territory and quite far apart.
So Eva has a comment here. In the Summer Palace of Tipu, there are paintings of the French fighting against the British. I believe they did actually fight against each other.
So Hyder Ali, Tipu's father,
Yeah.
was very clever. He brought in French generals or French army guys to train his troops. So that's the French. He actually employed some of them to fight for him. So it's not a French-British war per se, if you understand.
Um, yeah, excellent question from Ramakrishna here. Did the decision to leave India, was it prompted by their loss in Vietnam in 1954?
The decision to leave India, I do not know this one very properly, so I'm sorry, I can't give you a very definitive answer on that. But there was tremendous trouble between 47 and 54. The Indian government had been pressurizing the French government to give up these territories to India. And finally, the treaty was signed in 56. Out of all the territories, only a couple of them actually had any kind of national movement. The others, the French just allowed them to have a plebiscite and decided, okay, that they would leave. I'm sorry, I have not read enough to check if this was because of what was happening in Southeast Asia.
Fair enough. Excellent presentation, says Nabanita Roy. Meenal says, thank you for an illuminating presentation.
Thank you.
So question from Ramakrishna again, why were the British successful worldwide while France has a dismal colonial performance?
$1 million question. Government in France, abysmal and appalling, falling apart, French Revolution, fighting everywhere. British government far, far stronger and better. There's no two ways about that. The East India Company's strong, massive corporation, lots of money. It's little things that add up. The wars in Europe really bankrupted France to quite an extent. And then, of course, their French Revolution added to all of this. They were so busy fighting each other there that their colonial empires were falling apart.
Question from Adil again. Why were there so many flip-flops in the ownership by the French and the British in these places?
Oh, that's permanent. If you see that even for the Dutch. So
Yeah.
it's constant fighting amongst the colonial powers here. I don't want to call them colonial, I say the European powers here. The Dutch are fighting the Danes, the Dutch are fighting the French, the British are fighting the Dutch and the Dane and the French. Everybody's fighting each other because they want those trading towns. They want to control that town. Because if you control that town, all the tax coming in from the trade is yours. You don't want a factory, you want to rule the town. So that's the flip-flop. And you're right. When I was writing this also, I kept thinking people are going to get so bored. I'm saying now the French, now the British, now the French, now the British. So yeah, but that is exactly what was happening. It's all about the money, finally.
Right. Faradun says, thanks, Rashna, for a very erudite talk.
Thank you.
So again, right at the end, I think you showed some interesting images of Pondicherry. Um, is Pondicherry probably the one that has the most amount of sort of distinct French identity? I mean, is it the one that's retained most of its French identity? And is there a reason why Pondicherry managed to retain its distinct sort of identity post-independence?
I don't know really the reason why, but it is definitely the only one that has it. I could not find photographs of French buildings in all the others. It's very, very difficult. I could not even find a map for Karaikal. So, I mean, old map of France, French map. So, yes, Pondicherry does seem to have maintained it. The largest number of French live in Pondicherry, I think primarily because it is the main center. Karaikal, Mahe, and Yanaon are very, very small. And now, of course, tourism. Tourism brings tons of people to Pondicherry, to experience that French flavor. So you can see all these buildings have been sort of really well maintained, and they are being transferred into lovely little B&Bs and small guest houses and things. No private person owns them anymore. So yeah, I think that's it now.
So Jyoti asked a question, did the French, Dutch, British, did they trade only by sea or did they use the land route also?
Land route to India?
Yeah, I'm
No,
guessing. I don't think that
no,
is
no,
possible.
no,
So,
no, no,
yeah.
no, only by sea. Sea trade is so important. That's what the age of discovery is doing. You can carry so many goods on a ship, which you can't do if you're going to carry it on land. So internally, trade becomes much slower. But as entrepreneurs, Surat and the others are making so much money out of that.
Yeah. So wonderfully enlightening talk, Rashna. Thank you very much, says Meher Marfatia.
Same
Faridun,
here.
Faridun asked the question, what exactly were the factories they set up? I'm assuming this is very similar to what
Oh,
the
so
English had also,
factories.
right?
Okay, yes, yes. So a factory, sorry, I should have explained that. Forgive me. A factory was what European powers set up here. It was not a real factory. It was a warehouse. So you had somebody called a factor who stayed here. He was generally a European man. Um, it was his job to buy goods and store them in that factory. And goods, food, water would be stored in there. The ships would come, they would offload things, and they would take on the stuff he had gathered up, fresh water, food, and they would sail on. So, because there were so many goods within each warehouse, the Europeans argued with the Mughals that they needed protection and so they should fortify it. So slowly, slowly, factories started becoming fortified settlements. The French didn't call them factories, the French called them lodges, but it was pretty much exactly the same thing.
Right.
So they're not manufactories, they are factories where a factor has stored things, a warehouse.
Eva has posted a photograph of the wall painting here for people who want to
Oh,
check it
how
out in the
nice.
chat
I
group.
should check that, yeah.
Ramakrishna
I
asks,
should
why
check that.
was Chandranagar not a part of the Pondicherry Union Territory?
Because Chandranagar, frankly, I do not know this exactly. I'm sorry, I should specify this. I do not know exactly why Chandranagar was incorporated into the state of West Bengal. I must look up that a little bit more. Sorry, I should check
And
that.
Adil asks, what was the French influence on the Indian locals' religion and culture in Puducherry? Not really
In
much.
Puducherry, there is Christianity, but that's about it. But there isn't that much. The French are not proselytizing the way the Scots and others did. Mainly they're there for trade. So
Yeah.
I don't think there is such a great amount. But yes, the locals definitely, um, there are a lot of mixed race children coming out of this. And so, yeah, um, they're the ones still around as French nationals. So they are
So
Christian
one
and they're
one question,
Catholic, huh?
sorry, I had a question which is, given that the Marathas, pretty much controlled a large chunk of India in the 1700s, was there any sort of battle between the Marathas and
And
the
the French?
French?
No,
No?
no, nothing. The only thing is they took a little bit of Mahe, that's in Kerala,
Yeah.
and that also was taken back. So no, nothing. I didn't find anything when I was looking into this where they actually fought the French.
I have a wonderful question from Ishita Vadera. Uh, I always wonder, being a history student, what might have been the trajectory of Indian history if the French had succeeded in becoming the dominant European power in the subcontinent. Would be
We would have
amazing
been
to hear
speaking
your
in
insights on
French.
this.
We would have been speaking in French. I don't know.
Good
It's
answer. Yeah, these are
the
one of those
historians love
fun
to play the
riddles.
game what if?
What if?
What if? Yeah.
That's right.
I don't think the French had it in them to be able to control such a large thing the way the English East India Company did.
Well, there's a lot of appreciation, like I said on the chat. Rashna, thank you so much for a
Thank
very
you very
wonderful
much.
talk. And thanks to everyone else who called in for today's talk. Enjoy the weekend and hopefully see you again soon next week. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, everyone. Thank you.
Bye bye.